Predict, pick, and prevail in your fantasy football leagues with Nick Giacobbe and Nick Cap. From breakouts to busts, superstars to sleepers, these are the guys that will help you achieve fantasy glory. This is the PrimeTime Fantasy Podcast.
Welcome, everybody, to Season 4, Episode 39 of the PrimeTime Fantasy Football Podcast, where we give you our predictions, our picks, with the hopes that we help you prevail throughout Week 11 and the rest of the 2024 fantasy football season. I'm your host, Nick Giacobbe. Joining me is Nick Cap. So, Nick, my Seahawks did not play this week. It was a relief. My two big money fantasy teams won pretty big, so that was great. I didn't even tell you this. I made a trade today in my Dynasty League. I traded, I had 3/3 next year, so I traded a third and a fifth for Tony Pollard, who I've been banging on the desk for the few weeks to go and get him. So I lost Godwin, and it looks like I lost Olave, and I'm a little bit deep still, but I'm happy that I got another guy that I can play in my flex. I have Juwan Jennings in the flex right now, and I think I have also Quentin Johnston, Tank Dell, and a couple others. But I'm happy. I am happy with the trade that I made a couple hours ago.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good one to pull off. I like it for Dynasty, too. I mean, you got paid a good contract, so you should have him for a few years.
Hope so.
Before we get into it,
nice.
I do want to give a quick shout out to I went to a wedding this past weekend, and it is for the commissioner of one of my fantasy football leagues and his now wife, who's also in the league, Chris and Haley Salvatore. One of the best men was also in the league. I am currently 7-2 in that league, hopefully 8-2 after Monday Night Football. Probably not, but TBD. And I was told by everybody at that wedding that I got to stop winning so many games in this league. So that was a very nice compliment. But
so this is not a congratulations. This is I have a really good fantasy team. That's what this is.
And I won the championship last year in this league. So
yeah, this is Nick patting himself on the back.
A little bit, but I do want to congratulate the two of them, two good friends. Congratulations on the wedding. I know they also support the show. I've always shared it, so appreciate your guys' support and congratulations. Looking forward to dominating you guys in this league for the rest of your marriage.
Also, shout out to them. They did do a wedding during football season, which we don't love, but
Friday night.
It was a Friday night
wedding.
It wasn't fine. Nick did not miss any college football and no NFL football, so they did it right during football season. Yep. So. With that said, hopefully you all did have a good Week 10. We do apologize for no Week 10 live show. I don't remember the last time we missed a live show, but I was out of town in a car. Nick could not speak. So unfortunately, no live show for Week 10. Sometimes stuff happens, and that's what happened when you have two co-hosts. But we will come back to you guys Week 11 for our normal weekly live show available on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. If you're a first-time watcher or listener, thank you so much. This is the Primetime Fantasy Football Podcast. You get that live show from us on Sunday mornings, 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time, and then two shows during the week that are pre-recorded, one that drops on a Tuesday and one that drops on a Friday. This is our Tuesday show. Hopefully you're listening on a Tuesday, watching on a Tuesday, and we are recording Monday, very late Monday night, right when that football game is about to start. So on our Tuesday shows, we give you a waiver wire segment, which does seem to get shorter and shorter every week. And then we give you our top 5 takeaways from that week from a fantasy football perspective. And then we do a little bit of a trade segment to give you one player to trade for, one player to trade away. My life has been hectic, so I don't have the trade segment. Nick does, though, so Nick's going to provide you with some trade candidates later on in the show. So first off, we got your waiver wire. And again, this segment does get shorter and shorter as the weeks do go on. But let's talk about it. So for quarterbacks, Nick, it's a couple of guys we continuously talk about. And I feel like these are guys that will be available as the weeks go on, unless injuries do happen. But if you need a streamer, if you're in a 12 or 14 man league, maybe pick one of them up. So Tua Tagovailoa is owned in 46.3% of leagues. Russell Wilson owned in 40.2% of leagues. And Matt Stafford owned in 31% of leagues. So who would you like, Nick, if you did have to pick up one of these guys? I'm trying to think of there's really no quarterback injuries. Trevor got banged up, but I think he'll be back. But I don't know who's starting Trevor.
Yeah, I feel like most people that had Trevor have picked up a backup.
I'm trying to think of a situation where you need one of these guys. But if you did, who would you pick up? Dak. Yeah, Dak's a good one. Yeah. But you probably got your replacement last week. But anyway, if you did need one of these guys, who would you go with?
I still like Tua. I think that I'm going to still bang the drum on that. That offense is so loaded. They've had a ton of tough matchups with Tua in a quarterback. Their schedule lightens up a little bit in the quarterback side of things. So we definitely got to wait to see till later in the year. He's going to be a weekly streamer just like these other 3 guys, but this was the number 2 offense in football last year. Put up the second most points per game, and it was largely led by Tua in this offense. So I don't think that the offense has regressed this much. In the last few weeks, we've seen him put up a bunch of points. I mean, you'll see what happens Monday night. We're recording right now. It's about 25 minutes, 30 minutes before kickoff. So you'll know more than we do on the situation, but I feel like this offense is bound to bounce back at some point. It feels like it's been too long. It gets colder and people get concerned, but the schedule is so much easier on the back half than it was last year. So I think Tua is going to step it up a little bit more and be a more viable fantasy quarterback.
I'm cool with Tua or Stafford because I know who they're throwing to, and I know that the points that those offenses could score on a weekly basis. My guy Russ looks good, Nick, and I'll talk about him a little bit later in the show, but he would not be the option I'd like to roll out, knowing that the Steelers offense doesn't score a ton of points and is more of a defensive-minded team. But Russ has looked pretty good these last few weeks.
Yeah.
Moving on to running backs, we do have 2 backs here that might be worth picking up. We have Audric Estime owned in 1.1% of leagues. I don't think Javonte Williams was hurt yesterday. He just got the bulk of the touches in the snap shares, the rookie over there. Then Gus Edwards came off the IR, and I think he had a touchdown this week. He's owned in 20.6% of leagues. So I think they're both rosterable. I think if you're the owner of J.K. Dobbins, you should pick up Edwards just to make sure you have that handcuff. Same thing with Javonte Williams and Estime. I think I'd prioritize Estime just to see if he does get the bulk of the carries going forward. I think he's my number 1 waiver target this week.
I'm fine with that pick. I like the usage. I saw the yards per carry also going up against Kansas City. Not enough work.
6.2, I think. I think it was 6.2, something like that.
It was efficient. It was efficient for any running back that's gone up against them. But I still don't trust that Broncos offense. It worries me. For the last 2 years, they've always failed to get the running backs to throw in the touchdown.
Yes.
So last year, Javonte was on the field so much, got a ton of usage, and I think he had 2 or 3 touchdowns, and Russell Wilson had 29 on the totality of the season, having missed 2 games. So that does concern me a little bit. The touchdown upside on an offense that's already not scoring a ton of points, but I do like what I see. I think I like him a little bit more in that dynasty or keeper format because the usage is great, and you don't pick up running backs this late in the season with that great of usage unless there's an injury. So,
all right. Next, we do the receivers. Just 2 receivers here that probably aren't available, but we're still going to talk about them. So first off, we have Quentin Johnson, who we said for the past 2 or 3 weeks should be picked up. The Chargers don't throw a lot, but did have another touchdown this week. He's 5 or 6 on the season, so he does have a connection with Herbert. And then Ricky Pearsall owned in 25% of leagues. I think they're both worth picking up. I'd rather have Johnston, who could be the wide receiver 1 over there. Pearsall just seems like, another guy in the offense who will contribute, but there's just so many mouths to feed in that offense. It's going to be tough to figure out, who's going to play on a weekly basis. Kyle Shanahan also did say that Juwan Jennings is going to play the X position for the rest of the season. So should note that.
I like Pearsall. I think that offense rolls. I don't know when you're going to comfortably start him. That's kind of my concern. I mean, I like Johnston, obviously. If
you're in a dynasty league, I really like Pearsall, especially if he's been dropped. I think he was dropped in my dynasty league a couple weeks ago.
He's available in a lot of places, but I'm taking a look. He's only played 3 games healthy. 3 weeks ago was Kansas City, his debut. He did not play great, but he had 5 targets in it. 2 weeks ago against Dallas, 11.7. That's pretty decent. And then this past week at Tampa, 17.3. He did get the touchdown, but 73 yards and 4 catches. That is a Brandon Ayuk stat line. So I do think he's going to get a little bit more of that role. And we do need to keep in mind, he was a first-round wide receiver. It's not like they took him in the 3rd, 4th round. They clearly saw a lot of value and talent moving forward and upside with him. They wouldn't have done that in the 1st round if they didn't see that. So I'm going to trust the 49ers and say they think they found a gem. And with no Ayuk, maybe he's the guy that slots more into that role.
So I don't have any tight ends here. I don't think Nick has any other tight ends either, but we are going to talk about some defenses. It looks like a pretty good defensive week next week. So let's see who's available on your waiver wires. The Lions defense going up against the Jaguars offense could be Trevor, could be Mac Jones. Either way, I like it. The Rams are facing the Patriots. They got a ton of sacks against the Seahawks a week ago. Again, we're recording before Monday Night Football, or it might kick off in the next 10 minutes. But the Rams have got a lot of sacks against the Seahawks.
Yep.
The Vikings defense facing the Titans. Don't know who's going to be playing quarterback for the Titans. The Packers defense against the Bears. I think this is my favorite one because the Bears are just dysfunctional. And the Texans defense against the Cowboys, coming off against a 5 interception performance. That's 10 points right there for that Texans defense, and they still lost the game. But Nick, who would you prioritize, one or two defenses here? I personally like the Packers and the Texans.
I like the Texans defense at Dallas. Dallas looked horrendous. It's not really a road game because they're both in Dallas. It's a 2-hour drive. It's not terrible. So I do like that matchup for the Texans, especially when you're going to get Cooper Rush, who I think only threw for 46 yards in the entire game. That's a very good thing to see, and we know they don't run the ball well, so there is nothing they do well on that side of the ball. The Texans in a revenge spot really need to pick up that game. I do like the Lions. The Lions defense has looked great all year long. They do not allow 20 points in that game if Jared Goff doesn't turn the ball over 5 times. Jacksonville's defense is terrible. I think the Lions might win that one like 49-6. No matter who the quarterback is.
They should, but the NFL's so funky. The NFL's so funky, I kind of want to say the Jaguars are going to win, just how funky the NFL is. That would be that'd be such a game to happen.
I want to actually see what the line is in that game. I'm sure it's like a touchdown. It's probably like 10, 12 points.
Probably 8 points. I can say 8.5. Well, Nick's looking that up. I'm going to go to our top 5 takeaways. So again, if you're a first-time viewer or listener, the way that we do the top 5 fantasy football takeaways is Nick has 5, I have 5. We do not have the same 5, and they could be anything from a fantasy football perspective, and they're not ordered 1 to 5. It's just 5 takeaways that we have. So, Nick, I will let you go first as I normally do. What is your first takeaway from Week 10?
Well, before I get into that, the Detroit Lions are 13-point favorites in this game.
That is a high. You rarely see it that high. That's a
they probably
are
projecting that Mac Jones is the starter. So
I would love to get a Jag. I don't have the financial situation right now to even want to put a bet in, but I would love to put a $10 bet in on the Jaguars. I think they're going to cover that spread.
All right, we'll see. All right, so Nick, I do have a theme for the week. And I don't want to get tacky, but do you know those Costco guys? That Costco family?
No. Your theme is dead. Nope. No. I don't like the Costco guys. So I don't want to do your theme.
Deal with it. But my guys bring the boom. There goes Nick. I didn't know Nick didn't like the Costco guys. How can you not like the Costco family? What a bunch of lovely people. Oh, no, Nick left the stage, too. He's gone. He's really gone. We're bringing him back in.
For those of you guys that are only listening in podcast form, I think most of our listeners and watchers are on YouTube. I did just take myself off the video. I'm not going to get into it here, but yes, I'm not. They are not my favorite content creators out there. I support a brand of t-shirts called the Roosevelts. They're great. Go check them out. And I was at a big meetup this weekend, and a couple of my friends, we do have a running bit about the Costco guys, so it was kind of funny, but they also cursed our Yankees. I blame them for cursing the Yankees. So anyway,
well,
what do you got?
My takeaway is about the guys that bring the boom to you. And we're going to start off recapping. It was a long time ago, Thursday Night Football, because Jamar Chase put up the biggest game of the fantasy football season up to this point.
Was it? It probably was, right?
I'm sorry?
That was the biggest game, right? I feel like there was another.
That was the biggest game of the season so far. The closest
is the biggest one.
Closest is number 2. So Juwan Jennings is number 2. Jamar Chase had 55.4. Juwan Jennings had 46. So he cleared him by a touchdown, a catch, and 20 yards. It was actually more than that. But anyways, this was phenomenal. This is the second game of his career where he's had 260 receiving yards. He's the only player in NFL history to have done that twice in a career. Pretty phenomenal from this guy. This year, he's played Baltimore twice, obviously in division matchups. He was the wide receiver 1 in both of those weeks against Baltimore, 96.4 total points in those 2 games. Just so you know, those 2 games have more fantasy points than these 5 guys do on the entire season. Deebo Samuel, Mark Andrews, Mike Evans, Devontae Adams, and Tyreek Hill. Those 5 guys have scored less points in their 7, 8, 9 games. I know some of them missed some games with injury than the 2 games Jamar Chase has had against the Baltimore Ravens. Absolutely dominant. And the last 3 games, he's been without T. Higgins, and he is getting work. He's getting 11 targets in this past game, 17 targets. So if T. Higgins is not on the Cincinnati Bengals, and I think it's trending towards that this year or for next year, I am going to guess that Jamar Chase belongs as the 101 in fantasy, because this is just too many league-winning weeks or week-winning weeks from Jamar Chase to ignore. And this Bengals offense, he is the sole weapon, and they are finding a way to consistently give him the ball, no matter who else is out on the field. There is not a lot of teams that can guard Jamar Chase out there.
Yeah, and Joey B looked really good too. Joey B helped me win those 2 big matchups, and that defense is just terrible. Poor Joey B. Okay, I guess we'll just go to a Bengals takeaway since we talked a little bit of Bengals. I'm gonna go with Chase Brown. So Chase Brown is now the running back 1 over there with Cincy. I know they have Khalil Herbert. I'm not super worried about him. He has 10 plus fantasy points over the last 3 weeks and 22 plus over the last 2 weeks without Zach Moss. He's a running back 13 on the season. The Bengals score a lot of points. They're the 6th highest points per game and the 12th highest yards per game. And the yards per game isn't as impressive, but that's okay. Bengals defense is bad. The Bengals are still a really competitive team. They probably still have an outside chance of the playoffs, but they're really going to have to rip off a bunch of these games. But for them to score a lot of points, Chase Brown is going to get a lot of points. He's the lead back. Joe Mixon, I think, was running back 6 last year, and again, in no competition. So I think Chase Brown is going to finish as a top 10 back, and I think he could absolutely be a league winner over these last 6-7 weeks. If you drafted him late and you stuck with him, you now have a running back 1 starting in week 11, basically. And guess what? If you drafted Christian McCaffrey, you now have a running back 1 starting in week 11 as well. So congratulations.
Yeah.
All right. Who's your next? Boom. And we have a segment, an all boom segment. So we could use our own little bit for your booms.
Well, I guess so. I guess I could have saved it for the Thursday or Friday episode, but I like it for this one. So anyway, I said that I think Jamar Chase will be the 101 next year. Well, I'm going to tell you who I think will be the 102, and that is Bijan Robinson, who Nick and I don't know if we grilled him, but we said, he's not playing like the top 3.
I think we grilled the Falcons' usage of him. I don't think he was the problem. I think it was, why is Tyler Algier tapping in the red zone?
Maybe. I feel like we both agreed that he just wasn't playing to his superstar level. He was playing well. I mean, he was consistent.
Correct.
He's been great the last 5 games, and I rounded all these points. 26, 23, 24, 22, and 35 straight top 10 finishes, 5 straight finishes over 22 fantasy points. He hasn't had that game-winning 40, 50-point bomb that usually your RB1 on the season does, but the consistency has been great. Every game's been over 10. He's averaging about a little over 19 points per game. He's going to be a top 5 pick next year. You want to know who he kind of reminds me of? If you remember, I think it was 2020, Dalvin Cook, where the start of the year, he was like a 15 to 16 point per game guy. He wasn't really winning you weeks. He missed a couple weeks with injury, and then he came back and in like back-to-back weeks put up 75, 80 fantasy points total between the two. That's kind of what he reminds me of, where I think one of these next 3-4 weeks, he's going to have an RB1 35-plus point week winning performance that we haven't seen from him, and that's kind of going to solidify him being one of the top 2 or 3 picks next season.
Okay, so who do I want to go to next? Let's go to Chuba Hubbard. So Chuba Hubbard, running back 6 on the season, and a lot of people didn't want to draft him. I didn't want to draft him either. I don't want any Panther. But his average is also running back 14, which is pretty good. Average is 16.2. He has 2 stinkers. Week 1, only scored 1.4 points. Week 8, he scored 9.1. If we take out week 1, he's the overall running back 4 on the season with an average of 17.9. That's the 9th highest average of any running back. I am not worried about Jonathan Brooks because they just paid Chuba Hubbard and he's been very, very productive. He has 4 matchups over his last 6 games that are facing bottom 10 defenses that allow top 10 points of fantasy football running back. So 4 of his 6 matchups are positive. The Bucs twice, the Cowboys, and the Cardinals. 3 of those 4 matchups are during the playoffs. We might be talking about league winners. We might be talking about Chuba Hubbard legitimately winning you fantasy football leagues if he does keep up this pace and if he does take advantage of those very positive defensive matchups. And I wish I could tell you in the trade segment to go trade for Chuba Hubbard. I don't know who's trading Chuba Hubbard. And I think it's going to be tough to get him. So I can't even say go trade for him because I'm not sure who's going to give him up at this point.
I tried getting him last week in Dynasty, thinking like if Jonathan Brooks isn't really all that, he's at such a low value. And I wish I pulled the trigger on the deal because I don't think you're going to pry him after that 4-year deal from anybody in a long-term format. Well, let's talk about another running back in that division who I'm giving a little boom. He's not as big of a boom as the other 2 guys, but we've kind of shit on this player and his talent for a few weeks now. And last year we kind of liked him. We didn't love him, but he's still finishing at the top. Rachaad White, we have not talked about him at all outside of praising Bucky Irving, but Rachaad White's last 4 games are 29, 16, 13, and 19. He missed 1 game to injury in week 6. Now he gets a bye. And he's had over 50% snap share in every single game this year. There's one where he didn't, where I think he had 48%, but he was the RB2 on the week that week. So it's not even like we could say, oh, well, he's not getting workload there, because he was still he was the second best running back on the week. So we'll see if after the bye week they choose to switch and go all in on Bucky Irving. But as long as Rachaad White's there, he's been consistent. He has 5 of his 9 games this year with over 6 targets and 5 catches in each of those games. And he closes out the season with the easiest schedule for the running back position. So him and Bucky Irving, whoever comes out on top after the bye week, one of them is going to be a league winner. And here's what their next 6 games are after the bye. Giants, Panthers, Raiders, phenomenal matchups for him. Then you get the Chargers. That's a tough one for your first week of the playoffs. Then the week after is the Cowboys, who have been horrendous. And championship week, you get the Panthers defense. That is a great situation for these running backs. I don't know if I want to target Rachaad White as a trade candidate because there is the chance that they switch to Bucky Irving. But if you are the Rachaad White owner, you might have a diamond in the rough and a guy that nobody saw value in, was a top 10 maybe top 5 running back last season. And he's just putting up very similar numbers. And if he didn't have the injury, he probably finishes a lot higher on the year. But we'll see. We'll see where he winds up. I think he's going to finish close to the top 12 if they actually give him the same usage after the bye.
Nick, I want to talk about a guy that you've been high on up until this season. That's going to be Courtland Sutton. He's sitting there at wide receiver 16 on the season, which is better than a lot of receivers that we drafted over him. Mm-hmm. Last 3 weeks, he's at 17 plus fantasy points. He also has 15 plus fantasy points in 4 of his last 5. He's the wide receiver 8 since week 6. He did have a goose egg, so that actually hurts him, but he's still the wide receiver at 8. He has 3 positive matchups against bottom 10 defenses within fantasy football over the next 6 games. So his last 6 games, 3 of them will be very positive matchups against Cleveland, Indianapolis, and the Falcons. So with Bo Nix starting to really show his true colors in the NFL and is actually developing as a very solid rookie, Courtland Sutton has proven to be a week in and week out flex play who's going to get volume and will have positive matchups and a game script where they will normally be down. And that's going to be very, very positive for him going forward.
The first season on this podcast, I did not put my stamp of approval on him, and he has his best season he's had since we started the podcast of his career. Also, yes. Thank you very much, Courtland Sutton, for that.
And he's also scoring more points than Devontae Adams.
Yes, he is.
I think right now I'd rather trade for Courtland Sutton than Devontae Adams.
I agree with that entirely.
Yep.
We ain't talking Jets today, though. So let's talk.
Wait, I haven't gotten through my 5 points yet. Don't worry.
Jesus Christ.
Don't worry.
You do it every week. It's brutal.
All right. Number 4.
Week.
Who do you got? Number 4.
We didn't talk tight ends on waiver, but I'm going to talk about 2 tight ends now. I'm going to talk one in this takeaway and one in the next takeaway. And a guy that has been booming, and Travis Kelce. Nick and I, we probably jumped the gun a little bit on saying he was going to be a bust after a few weeks, because the last 3 games, 25 points, 22 points, 20 points, tight end 3, tight end 2, and tight end 1 on the week. 40 targets in those 3 games. Since week 4, he only has 1 game under 15 fantasy points to the 49ers, who hold every single tight end under 15 fantasy points. So that is nothing to worry about. He's got 9 plus targets in 5 of the last 6 games, and he is going to finish as a top 1, 2, or 3 tight end on the season. Again, he's Mr. Consistency. If Kansas City wins the Super Bowl, maybe he calls it a career and hangs it up on a high note. Maybe that's the way it goes down, and it feels like that's the path it will go down. But Travis Kelce, Nick and I owe you an apology because we jumped the gun on busting you.
All right, Nick, I'm going to talk about Mr. Unlimited and what he's doing for George Pickens. So Pickens since week 7 is your wide receiver 17. That also includes a bye week in there. He has double digits in all 3 games at Russell Wilson. I believe it's all 3 games at Russell Wilson. 20 plus fantasy points in 2 of those 3 games. His average is 18 points per game, which is ranked 9th all since week 7. Russ is the quarterback 15. He has 13 plus fantasy points in all 3 games, and his Average is 19.3. He's the 11th ranked average quarterback. 4 of the last 7 matchups for the Steelers will be very positive for receivers specifically against bottom 10 defenses. The Ravens twice, who we just saw Jamar Chase obliterate, and then the Browns twice. So 4 divisional matchups in your last 6. And the Steelers are starting to score more points. I think they have 30 plus in a couple straight games at this point. If you're a George Pickens owner, you have to be thrilled with the Russell Wilson change. Yep. And Russ looks good enough. This is exactly why they signed him. And this is a good situation for both of those guys. Number 5.
All right, I'm talking to another tight end. And Nick, I got 2 trivia questions for you. I'll tell you the name first. And we're going to talk about George Kittle. Nick, George Kittle has played in 8 games this year. How many times do you think he has finished as a top 5 tight end in those 8 games?
Every week.
5 of those weeks. 5. Not that ambitious, but he did finish as a top 10 tight end in all 8 of those games. He has been a model of consistency. He has 6+ targets in 5 games this year, 7 touchdowns in 8 games. He is a tight end 1 on the year. And it's crazy because George Kittle was good. He always found a way to finish in the top 5. And it was because of 3 or 4 league-shattering winning weeks. That's what he did. He would give you that 25, that 30, that 35, that 40 bomb that would somehow propel him to a top 5 tight end. He'd give you 3 of those a year. That's what he did. That's exactly the Tyler Lockett model. Tyler Lockett is a great example of an inconsistent fantasy receiver that if you put in that second flex spot, could go get you 2.1 or you could get you 39.1. Like that was the Tyler Lockett scale. That was the George Kittle scale, a little adjusted for the tight end position. And he's just been one of the most consistent tight ends, probably the most consistent tight end for fantasy football this season, obviously, is the tight end 1. The schedule is going to get tough down the stretch. We'll see if he maintains this success. But as of right now, he is your tight end 1 on the year. He is booming, and he has been great.
I think I might be reusing a point from last week. This is the last time I'll talk about it. The Cowboys' offense is terrible. You can still probably play CeeDee Lamb, but everybody else, They scored 6 points this week without Dak against the Eagles. And the Eagles' defense has gotten a little bit better, but they just look bad at every aspect. And even before the Eagles game, they ranked 10th lowest in points per game. For context, this is the same Cowboys offense last year that was number 2 in points per game, only behind the Miami Dolphins. So overall this season, the Cowboys offense has not gelled or meshed. I'm not sure if Mike McCarthy does get another year, but I think he should be on the chopping block towards the end of the year. So my takeaway is that the Cowboys offense is bad. Play your defenses against them, and every Cowboy not named CeeDee Lamb probably can be dropped, if I'm being particularly honest with you.
Just so you know as well, the Eagles defense that you're talking about, they have allowed the second least amount of points per game since week 3 of the season.
So that could have gotten better.
Vic Fangio has 180 that defense from what it was.
They've still been bad against receivers, though.
Yeah. And also, just real quick, since we're going to get into the segment, Jalen Waddle, 38-yard catch from our guy Tua. So we like to see that going into I got 4 leagues that are going to be determined tonight by this game. It's projected 2-2 in them, so we'll see. But we'll see how it goes. But
all right, so we're getting into our trade segment. Nick told you guys a couple weeks ago to trade for Jalen Waddle. I took Nick's advice and traded Tank Bigsby for him. I needed a receiver in a league where I have Jahmyr Gibbs, Ken Walker, and Saquon Barkley. So got a good receiver in there. I've told you to trade for Mike Evans. I've told you to trade for Pollard. Nick has told you to trade for who's the hen? There's another running back. Achan, who's been phenomenal. And again, we're recording during the game, so we don't know how he's done. But again, I couldn't compile enough notes to give you guys enough facts, and I didn't want to just spit names out of you. But Nick has a trade for and traded candidates. I'll let him take the floor.
So I want to trade for Calvin Ridley. I said it on the Thursday or Friday episode.
Do you think he'll be traded? Do you think that people would trade him though? Because I was looking at trading for him, and I saw the point total he scored. I'm not sure if people want to trade him.
I think it's harder to trade for him on Sleeper, and I'll get into it at the end of the take, than it is on other platforms because green is good, red is bad on Sleeper, and you kind of know what the rest of the season looks like. So I don't think you could get him on Sleeper as easily as you can on other platforms, but I think a lot of people are scared of that Titans offense and Will Levis to the point where they do not trust Calvin Ridley in their lineups, and it's getting towards trustworthy. So he has 5 straight games over 8 targets now. He has the easiest rest of season schedule for the wide receiver position. Every game is against a top 10 team in points allowed to the wide receiver position. That's why I don't think you're going to be able to get him on Sleeper, because if you go ahead and look at the game log, when you go to look at the stats, there's a lot of green in targets and rest of season schedule. If you're on ESPN, Yahoo, or one of those other platforms that doesn't show it to you, you got a much better shot at making that trade. And most importantly, of those games, he has 2 of them that are revenge games against the Jacksonville Jaguars, who did not want to pay him that contract. And one of those 2 is your championship week. So I really like Calvin Ridley as a good flex option for the rest of the year. I do think you do need to pay up a tiny bit for him. I didn't think he'd be as great last week in a very tough matchup, and it turns out he was phenomenal, which reinforces why you should want Calvin Ridley. But that's one of them that that's a player that I am targeting right now in my leagues. So now I go to the trade away. Someone I don't want as much, and Nick, this might come as a shock to you. I don't want Brian Thomas Jr. on my lineup anymore.
I don't blame you.
If I'm in a redraft league, and I know Mac Jones might be the quarterback for the rest of the season, whether it's Trevor or him, I do not want him. He's got the bye week in 2 weeks, right after he gets Houston, who has been very easy, but he follows up the rest of the year to only teams ranked top 5 in points per game allowed to the wide receiver position. So if you're in a dynasty format, if you're in a keeper format and have the eligibility to keep him, I love Brian Thomas Jr. If you need him for the rest of the season in a 1-year redraft league, I think he's going to wind up on your bench more often than not, and I don't think you're going to be able to trust him on the rest of the season. We've watched Christian Kirk go down already, and he has not taken that second-level jump that you wanted him to take in terms of workload, mostly because Evan Engram has been a target machine over there for the most part, and that offense has not been good enough to stay on the field. So I don't think you're going to get a ton of Brian Thomas boom games that we were hoping for. I think you're going to get a few more of those busts or close to that 10-point mark too safe. I don't think he's going to go ahead and win you multiple weeks for the rest of the season.
All right. Thank you for that. And that was our Tuesday show leading into week 11. Hopefully we helped you out with your waiver wires and some other stuff that will help you out over the next couple weeks as you're making that final playoff push. If you're a first-time viewer, please subscribe to the YouTube channel. I really appreciate that. Hit that bell icon so you get notifications every time we post a new video or go live. You can also listen to us on audio streaming platforms, iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and or Anchor. Just make sure to hit that subscribe button and leave a 5-star review wherever you do consume that content. We're also available on social media, PrimeTime FF Pod on Twitter is PrimeTime FF Pod, Instagram PrimeTime Fantasy Football Podcast. If you have any questions throughout the week, so make sure to set those waiver wires, make sure to make those trades, and we'll talk to you guys on Friday.